The Boeing 777 sat motionless on the tarmac at Heathrow, surrounded by flashing blue lights that reflected off its polished fuselage like cold fire. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. No one even breathed normally. Passengers who, hours earlier, had been sipping champagne and watching movies now sat frozen in their seats, eyes darting between the armed officers and the tall man standing in the aisle. Marcus Thorne stood perfectly still. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply watched. Beside him, his daughters clung to each other. Maya, the older one, tried to stay strong, but her fingers trembled as they gripped her father's sleeve. Chloe didn't even try to hide her fear. Tears ran freely down her cheeks. "Dad," she whispered. Marcus didn't look at her. Not because he didn't care, but because he understood something she didn't. Fear spreads. And if they saw fear in his face, it would destroy them. So he stayed calm. Even now. Especially now. At the front of the cabin, Captain Reynolds stood beside the armed police, his chin lifted, his uniform immaculate, his authority wrapped around him like armor. "This is the man," Reynolds said, pointing. His finger didn't shake, but his voice did. "He threatened the safety of this aircraft." A murmur spread through the passengers. Threaten the aircraft? Hijacking. The word hung unspoken, but everyone felt it. The lead officer, DCI Graves, stepped forward slowly. He was an older man, his gray hair cropped short, his face carved with years of experience. He had seen real criminals, real terrorists, real fear, and something about Marcus Thorne didn't fit. Still, procedure was procedure. "Sir," Graves said calmly, "I need you to come with us." Chloe grabbed Marcus's arm tighter. "No," she cried. Marcus gently placed his hand over hers. "It's okay," he said softly. It wasn't, but she needed to believe it was. Reynolds watched the moment with tight lips. He had expected anger, resistance. Not this. Not control. Graves gestured toward the open aircraft door, where more officers waited. Marcus took one step forward, then stopped. He turned toward Reynolds. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not threats, recognition. Reynolds saw it, and it terrified him. Because Marcus wasn't looking at him like an enemy. He was looking at him like a problem that would be solved later. Graves noticed the look. He made a mental note. Marcus walked with the officers toward the door. Each step echoed in the silent cabin. Passengers leaned into the aisle, watching the fall of a powerful man. Or so they thought. At the door, Marcus paused. He turned back to his daughters. "Stay here," he said. Maya shook her head immediately. "We're not leaving you." Marcus smiled faintly. "You're not." He looked at Graves. "My daughters stay with me." Graves hesitated. Reynolds spoke sharply. "That's not necessary." Marcus ignored him. Graves studied Marcus for a long second, then nodded. "They can come." Reynolds' jaw tightened. This was already slipping out of his control. They stepped off the plane together. The cold air hit them instantly. Flashing lights. Police vehicles. Airport security. Ground crew frozen in place, watching. Marcus's shoes touched the tarmac. And in that moment, everything changed. Not for him. For everyone else. Because the illusion was breaking. They led him toward an armored vehicle. Chloe clung to his side. "Dad, why are they doing this?" Marcus looked down at her. "Because they don't know who I am." But he didn't say it. Instead, he said, "Because sometimes people make mistakes." Graves heard it. He glanced at Marcus. Most men in this situation cursed, shouted, blamed. This one didn't. That meant something. Behind them, Reynolds stepped off the aircraft last. He stood tall, watching Marcus being escorted away. This was justice. This was necessary. This was right, wasn't it? But deep inside, something whispered a different truth. He ignored it. Graves opened the vehicle door. "Sir, please." Marcus stopped. He looked back at the aircraft. At the logo on its side. Royal Horizon. His airline. His aircraft. His employees. None of them knew yet, but they would. He stepped inside. The door slammed shut. Chloe jumped at the sound. Marcus placed his arm around her shoulders. Through the small window, he could see Reynolds standing alone on the tarmac. Watching. Waiting. Marcus held his gaze. Reynolds felt it even through the glass. And for the first time since this began, he wasn't sure he had won. The engine started. The vehicle began to move. And as it did, Marcus Thorne reached into his pocket and turned his phone back on. The armored vehicle rolled across the restricted service road, its tires humming against the damp Heathrow pavement. Inside, no one spoke. Marcus Thorne sat in the center seat, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. To his left, Maya stared straight ahead, her jaw tight, forcing herself not to cry. To his right, Chloe leaned into him, her fingers gripping his coat like a lifeline. Across from them, DCI Graves watched. He had transported terrorists in vehicles like this. Drug traffickers. Men who sweated. Men who begged. Men who lied. Marcus Thorne did none of those things. He simply reached into his coat pocket. Graves' voice sharpened. "Sir, leave the phone where it is." Marcus didn't look up. "It was off during the flight, Inspector. Aviation rules." His thumb pressed the power button. The screen came alive. Graves felt something shift. "You're not permitted to contact anyone yet." Marcus finally looked at him. Not angry. Not defiant. "Certain." "I'm not contacting anyone," Marcus said. He paused. "I'm informing them." He entered a passcode. The phone unlocked. Maya glanced at the screen. She saw the name at the top. Board, priority. Her stomach tightened. Marcus pressed call. The line rang once. Twice. Then connected. A calm female voice answered immediately. "Mr. Thorne." Marcus spoke in the same calm tone. "Status." No greeting. No explanation. Just one word. The woman didn't hesitate. "Acquisition completed 20 minutes ago. All shares transferred. Regulatory filing submitted. Control is yours." Graves frowned. "Acquisition? Control?" Marcus nodded slightly. "Board notified?" "Yes." "Public disclosure?" "Pending your authorization." Marcus looked out the window. The airport blurred past. Fuel trucks. Ground crews. Aircraft tails rising into the gray sky. "Authorize." A pause. Then, "Yes, sir." The call ended. Chloe looked up at him. "Dad, what acquisition?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He simply turned the screen toward her. She read the headline. Royal Horizon Airways. Ownership transfer complete. Her breath caught. Maya leaned closer. She read it too. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You bought the airline?" Marcus locked the phone. "Yes." The word landed heavier than any shouted declaration. Across from him, Graves felt a cold sensation crawl up his spine. "You're telling me," Graves said carefully, "you purchased Royal Horizon Airways." Marcus met his eyes. This morning. Graves' mind raced. The aircraft. The captain. The arrest. He looked at the armed officers beside him. They looked back, uncertain. Because suddenly, everything had changed. In the cockpit of the grounded Boeing 777, Captain Reynolds sat alone. The adrenaline was fading. In its place came something else. Unease. The cockpit door was open now. Airport police had stepped away. Procedure was in motion. He had done his duty. Reported a threat. Protected the aircraft. Protected the passengers. So, why didn't it feel like victory? A knock came at the cockpit frame. A young airline operations officer stood there, pale. "Captain?" "Yes." The man hesitated. "There's been a development." Reynolds frowned. "What development?" The man swallowed. "The ownership of Royal Horizon changed hands." Reynolds stared. "What?" 20 minutes ago. The words didn't make sense. "That's impossible." The man held up his tablet. On the screen was the filing. The confirmation. The name. Marcus Thorne. Reynolds felt his mouth go dry. "That's not." He stopped. Because it was. His hands slowly tightened on the armrests. When? The man answered quietly. While you were in the air. The armored vehicle stopped. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Marcus stepped out. He stood tall.
Calm.
Unhurried. Graves stepped out beside him. He no longer reached for Marcus's arm. He no longer treated him like a suspect. Because suspects don't buy airlines. They entered the private security office. Inside, officials waited. Airport authority. Airline representatives. Police command. Every eye turned toward Marcus. Some recognized him. Some didn't. But all of them sensed it. Power had entered the room. Graves cleared his throat. This is Mr. Thorne. One of the airline officials stepped forward. A senior operations director. He forced a polite smile. Mr. Thorne, we weren't informed you'd be arriving. Marcus looked at him. You were. The man blinked. Marcus continued. You just didn't listen. Silence. Graves gestured toward a chair. Marcus sat. Maya and Chloe beside him. Graves remained standing. Professional. But no longer certain who was in charge. He folded his arms. For the record, Mr. Thorne, Captain Reynolds reported that you threatened the safety of the aircraft and attempted to assert unlawful control. Marcus nodded once. I asserted lawful control. Graves held his gaze. And the threats? Marcus's expression didn't change. I made none. The room remained silent. Graves spoke carefully. We have the cockpit recording. Marcus nodded again. Play it. They did. The same audio filled the room. Reynolds' voice. Aggressive. Emotional. Marcus's voice.
Calm.
Controlled. When it ended, no one spoke. Because there was nothing to add. The truth was simple. And it was devastating. Graves turned to the airline director. Is Captain Reynolds aware of the ownership transfer? The man hesitated. Yes. Graves nodded slowly. He understood now. This wasn't about aviation safety. This was about ego. Authority. Challenge. He looked at Marcus. Marcus didn't look back. He was watching his daughters. Making sure they were okay. Graves made his decision. He spoke clearly. Captain Reynolds will be detained pending investigation. The airline director stiffened. That may not be necessary. Graves cut him off. It is. Because Graves had seen something rare. A man falsely accused. And a man who abused authority. He wouldn't confuse the two. In the cockpit, Reynolds' hands trembled. Footsteps approached.
Police.
Not for Marcus. For him. He stood.
Confused. Angry.
Afraid. What is this? No one answered immediately. One officer stepped forward. Captain William Reynolds. Reynolds swallowed. Yes. You need to come with us. His world tilted. Because for the first time since this began, he wasn't the one giving orders. In the security office, Marcus's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. Board confirmed. Transition complete. He silenced it. Maya leaned her head on his shoulder. Is it over? Marcus thought for a moment. Then answered honestly. Yes. But what he didn't say was this. This was never about revenge. It was about correction. Balance. A reminder. That power doesn't belong to uniforms. Or titles. Or cockpits. It belongs to those who refuse to be made small. Outside, through the glass, Marcus watched as Captain Reynolds was escorted across the tarmac. Their eyes met. Just for a second. Reynolds' face held disbelief. Marcus's face held nothing. Because this moment had been decided long before the plane ever landed. And Reynolds was the last one to realize it. Captain Reynolds had walked across that same tarmac hundreds of times in his career. In rain. In snow. In darkness before dawn. Every step had always meant the same thing.
Authority. Respect. Control.
But this walk was different. This time, he wasn't walking toward an aircraft. He was walking away from one. 2 police officers walked beside him. Not touching him. Not forcing him. They didn't need to. The absence of his uniform cap made him feel exposed. Smaller. Ground crew, who once greeted him with admiration, now avoided his eyes. Some stared. Others pretended not to see. But everyone knew. News traveled fast in airports. Faster than planes. Reynolds tried to speak. "This is a misunderstanding." No one responded. One officer opened the rear door of a security vehicle. "Please get in, Captain. Please." The word was polite. The meaning wasn't. Reynolds hesitated. He looked past them, through the glass wall of the private security office. And he saw him, Marcus Thorne, sitting calmly, his daughters beside him. Not in handcuffs. Not surrounded. Not broken. Reynolds felt something twist inside his chest. Because in that moment, he understood something he hadn't understood before. He had never really been in control. He had only been allowed to feel like he was. He climbed into the vehicle. The door closed. And just like that, his career was no longer his. Inside the security office, silence lingered after Reynolds disappeared from view. No one celebrated. No one spoke. Because power shifting isn't loud. It's quiet.
Precise.
Final. Marcus stood. Maya looked up at him. "Where are you going?" He adjusted his coat. "To finish this." Chloe grabbed his hand. "Are they going to arrest him?" Marcus looked down at her. His answer was calm. "They're going to investigate him." He didn't say more. Because he didn't need to. Graves stepped forward. His voice carried respect now. "Mr. Thorne, there will be paperwork. Statements." Marcus nodded. "Of course." Graves hesitated. Then asked the question that had been sitting in his mind since the phone call. "Did you know this would happen?" Marcus met his eyes.
No.
A pause. "But I knew what kind of man he was." Graves accepted the answer. Because he had seen it too. Authority reveals character faster than anything else. And Reynolds had revealed his. An hour later, Marcus walked back onto the aircraft. This time no police. No weapons. No tension. Just silence. Passengers were gone. Cabin empty. The same seats. The same air. But everything felt different. Maya followed him down the aisle. "Why did you come back?" Marcus ran his fingers lightly along the top of a seat. "Because this is where it started." Chloe stayed close behind. It was scary. Marcus stopped. He turned to her. "I know." She looked at the cockpit. That man was angry. Marcus followed her gaze. The cockpit door was open. Empty. Powerless. He walked toward it slowly. Each step measured. He stepped inside. Sat in the captain's seat. For a moment he said nothing. He just looked out the window. At the runway stretching into the gray distance. Maya stood in the doorway. "You're the boss now." Marcus shook his head slightly.
No.
She frowned. "But you own it." Marcus looked at her. Ownership isn't the same as control. She didn't understand. Not yet. One day she would. He stood. Left the seat behind. Because some chairs weren't meant to be kept. Only understood. At airline headquarters across the airport, executives rushed through corridors. Emergency meetings. Urgent calls. Legal teams. Public relations. Damage control. Because the story was spreading. A captain detained. An ownership transfer. A billionaire on board. Every minute increased the pressure. Inside the main boardroom, Marcus entered without knocking. The room fell silent instantly. Men and women in expensive suits stood. Some nervous. Some defensive. All uncertain. Marcus didn't sit at the head of the table. Not yet. He stood at the center. "I want the full incident report." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. One executive nodded quickly. "It's being prepared." Marcus continued. "I want passenger statements." Another nod. "And I want to know how this happened." No one answered immediately. Because they all knew the truth. This wasn't policy. This wasn't safety. This was human failure. Finally, one older board member spoke carefully. Captain Reynolds had an exemplary record. Marcus looked at him. Until he didn't. Silence returned. Marcus let it sit there. Because silence forces honesty. He looked around the table. At 30,000 feet, Passengers trust this airline with their lives. He paused. That trust was broken. No one argued. Because no one could. Marcus walked to the head of the table. This time, he sat. Not to claim power, but to accept responsibility. Because ownership meant more than control. It meant accountability. Back at the terminal, Graves finished his report. He watched through the window as Marcus's aircraft sat quietly at the gate. He had seen powerful men before. Most of them demanded respect. Marcus never had. He had simply expected fairness. Graves respected that more. One of his officers approached. "Sir, was he really worth billions?" Graves answered simply. "That wasn't the important part." The officer frowned. "What was?" Graves looked back at the plane. He never needed to prove it. That evening, Marcus stood alone in his office, overlooking the runway. Planes took off. Planes landed. Life moved forward. Maya and Chloe waited in the car downstairs. Safe. That was all that mattered. His phone buzzed. A message. Investigation opened. He read it, then locked the phone. Not satisfied. Not relieved. Just finished. Because this had never been about winning. It had been about reminding the world of something simple. Respect isn't given by position. It's given by character. And once lost, it doesn't come back. The silence that money bought. By the time Jeffrey Epstein was sitting in a jail cell in Manhattan in 2019, the money had already done its job. Not just the spending, not just the hiding, the silencing. For decades, his financial system didn't just move wealth. It moved protection. Because the real power of Epstein's money was never in how much he had. It was in how many people depended on it. Money creates gravity. And Epstein's money pulled people into his orbit slowly, then completely. Lawyers who defended him aggressively. Bankers who approved accounts that made no logical sense. Accountants who structured entities with no employees, no products, no services, yet millions flowing through them. And powerful friends who never asked questions publicly. Because asking questions would mean confronting the system they benefited from. His primary company, Financial Trust Company, was especially important. It wasn't just an office. It was a private financial engine. Epstein used it to move his own money without relying on traditional outside firms that might question transactions. He controlled it. He controlled the records. He controlled the narrative. From there, money spread outward. Payments labeled as consulting fees. Payments labeled as investments. Payments labeled as management expenses. But labels are just words. And words can hide anything. Some payments were regular, monthly, predictable. Others were sudden, large, and unexplained. The pattern wasn't random. It was strategic. Because predictable payments create dependency. And dependency creates silence. People protect what feeds them. Epstein understood that better than anyone. He didn't need to threaten most people. He didn't need to force them. The money itself did the work. Because once someone accepts money, they become connected to its source. And once connected, walking away becomes harder. Speaking out becomes dangerous. Even internally, banks noticed unusual activity. Compliance officers flagged transactions. Large transfers between Epstein's entities. Payments to individuals. International wires that lacked clear business purpose. But flags don't stop money. People stop money. And people hesitated. Because Epstein wasn't just another client. He was a wealthy client. A connected client. A profitable client. Banks earn millions from clients like that. And profit creates tolerance. Tolerance creates delay. Delay creates protection. By the mid-2000s, after his first criminal case, Epstein should have become financially radioactive. Instead, his system adapted. Some institutions distanced themselves. Others quietly stepped in. Because wealth always finds somewhere to go. Money doesn't disappear. It relocates. New accounts. New entities. New pathways. The machine kept running. And outwardly, nothing looked different. His properties were still staffed. His planes still flew. His investments still existed. His life still functioned. Which raises the most disturbing question. If everything was supposed to end in 2008, why didn't it? The answer sits inside the financial trail. Because Epstein's wealth wasn't just stored. It was protected by structure.
Trusts.
Shell companies. Legal barriers. Each layer designed to separate him from direct ownership. On paper, assets belong to entities. Entities belong to trusts. Trusts belong to legal arrangements. And legal arrangements belong to paperwork. Not people. That's how money survives its owner. Even after his death in August 2019, the money didn't vanish. It remained. Properties still existed. Accounts still existed. Trusts still existed. Because the system was built to outlive him. His estate was estimated at over $600 million. But even that number may not reflect the full picture. Because offshore structures don't always reveal themselves easily. And hidden money stays hidden until someone forces it into the light. Investigators followed the trail. Victims filed claims. Lawyers fought over assets. Banks faced scrutiny. But the money itself never speaks. It leaves clues, fragments, transactions,
Dates. Amounts.
connections, but never intent. Intent lives in people. And Epstein took much of that intent with him. Still, the financial story reveals something deeper. Money didn't just enable his life. It extended his protection. For years. Longer than most people thought possible. Because wealth doesn't just buy comfort. It buys time. Time delays consequences. Time weakens outrage. Time allows systems to protect themselves. And Epstein's greatest asset wasn't cash. It was time. He built a financial structure that kept operating even when his reputation collapsed. Even when charges surfaced. Even when scrutiny increased. Because systems built slowly are harder to destroy quickly. And Epstein built his system over decades. One account at a time. One entity at a time. One transaction at a time. By the time the world fully looked, the machine was already massive, complex, entangled, and resilient. Which leaves one final reality. Jeffrey Epstein is gone. But the pathways his money created still exist. The reckoning. 1 year later, the video still existed. It never disappeared. It lived on phones, on servers, in memories. A 19-year-old girl on her knees,
Crying.
humiliated, powerless. And the world had watched it happen. Now the world was watching something else. Redemption. The auditorium in London was silent. Hundreds of people sat in expensive suits. Executives, investors, media. On the massive screen behind the stage was a single image. Not a logo, not a stock chart, just a photo. The photo. The moment everything broke. At the podium stood Maya Thorne. She was 20 now. Older, stronger, but not untouched. Trauma didn't vanish. It became part of you. She looked at the audience.
Took a breath. And spoke.
1 year ago, I learned how quickly dignity can be taken from you. Her voice was calm, controlled. But I also learned how it can be given back. Silence filled the room. No one moved. No one interrupted. Because this wasn't a corporate speech. It was truth. They didn't see a passenger. She paused. They saw a stereotype. Some executives lowered their eyes. Because they had been part of that system. Whether they admitted it or not. But this, she gestured behind her. This isn't about revenge. She let the word hang. It's about responsibility. In the front row sat Marcus Thorne. He didn't smile. He didn't clap. He simply listened. Because this wasn't his moment. It was hers. He had given her power. She had turned it into purpose. Maya continued. This year, Royal Horizon compensated 312 passengers who were wrongfully mistreated. A murmur spread. Many hadn't known the number was that high. 312 lives, she said. 312 stories. She leaned forward slightly. And 312 reminders that change was overdue. In New York, in a small apartment in Queens, a woman named Angela watched the speech on her old television. She had been one of the 312. 2 years earlier, She had been denied boarding, accused of using a fake ticket. She had missed her mother's funeral. No apology. No accountability. Until now. A letter had arrived months ago, with compensation and an apology, signed personally. She wiped her eyes, because someone had finally said it mattered. Back in London, Maya finished. My father bought an airline. She looked at Marcus briefly, but he didn't change it. She looked back at the audience. We did. Silence. Then applause. Not polite applause. Not forced applause. Real applause. Because they understood. This wasn't about wealth. It was about courage. After the event, outside the building, Maya stood alone. The city moved around her.
Cars.
Voices. Life. Marcus approached quietly. You did well. She nodded. I meant it. He studied her. I know. She looked at him. Did you ever regret it? He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. Buying the airline. Starting the war. Burning billions. No, he said. Not hesitation. Not uncertainty.
Truth.
Because it wasn't about the airline. He placed a hand on her shoulder. It was about you. She looked down. Not sad. Not hurt. Just thoughtful. I was weak that day. Marcus shook his head.
No.
He turned her gently to face him. You were human. At JFK Airport, Terminal 4, the same lounge still stood. Same glass. Same marble. But a small plaque now sat beside the entrance. Most passengers walked past it without noticing, but some stopped. And read. It said, Royal Horizon Airlines commitment. Every passenger deserves dignity. No exceptions. Inside, a young gate agent greeted passengers. She was new.
First week on the job.
Nervous. A teenage boy approached wearing cheap clothes. Worn shoes. Old backpack. She smiled. Welcome. No hesitation. No suspicion. Just respect. Because now she understood. You never knew who someone was. But more importantly, it didn't matter. High above the Atlantic, another Royal Horizon plane flew through the clouds. Passengers slept, watched movies, lived their lives. Normal, peaceful, safe. In seat 1A, Maya looked out the window. Sunlight filled the sky. Endless.
Free.
Chloe slept beside her. Marcus worked quietly across the aisle. Everything looked ordinary. But Maya knew the truth. Nothing about this was ordinary. Because 1 year ago, she had been powerless. And now, she was not. She closed her eyes. Not to escape.
But to rest.
Because the fight was over. And they had won. Not by money. Not by fear. But by refusing to accept humiliation. And turning pain into legacy. By the time Jeffrey Epstein was sitting in a jail cell in Manhattan in 2019, the money had already done its job. Not just the spending. Not just the hiding. The silencing. For decades, his financial system didn't just move wealth. It moved protection. Because the real power of Epstein's money was never in how much he had. It was in how many people depended on it. Money creates gravity. And Epstein's money pulled people into his orbit slowly, then completely. Lawyers who defended him aggressively. Bankers who approved accounts that made no logical sense. Accountants who structured entities with no employees, no products, no services, yet millions flowing through them. And powerful friends who never asked questions publicly. Because asking questions would mean confronting the system they benefited from. His primary company, Financial Trust Company, was especially important. It wasn't just an office. It was a private financial engine. Epstein used it to move his own money without relying on traditional outside firms that might question transactions. He controlled it. He controlled the records. He controlled the narrative. From there, money spread outward. Payments labeled as consulting fees. Payments labeled as investments. Payments labeled as management expenses. But labels are just words. And words can hide anything. Some payments were regular, monthly, predictable. Others were sudden, large, and unexplained. The pattern wasn't random,
It was strategic.
because predictable payments create dependency. And dependency creates silence. People protect what feeds them. Epstein understood that better than anyone. He didn't need to threaten most people. He didn't need to force them. The money itself did the work. Because once someone accepts money, they become connected to its source. And once connected, walking away becomes harder. Speaking out becomes dangerous. Even internally, banks noticed unusual activity. Compliance officers flagged transactions. Large transfers between Epstein's entities. Payments to individuals. International wires that lacked clear business purpose. But flags don't stop money.
People stop money.
And people hesitated. Because Epstein wasn't just another client. He was a wealthy client. A connected client. A profitable client. Banks earn millions from clients like that. And profit creates tolerance. Tolerance creates delay. Delay creates protection. By the mid-2000s, after his first criminal case, Epstein should have become financially radioactive. Instead, his system adapted. Some institutions distanced themselves. Others quietly stepped in. Because wealth always finds somewhere to go. Money doesn't disappear. It relocates.
New accounts.
New entities. New pathways. The machine kept running. And outwardly, nothing looked different. His properties were still staffed. His planes still flew. His investments still existed. His life still functioned. Which raises the most disturbing question. If everything was supposed to end in 2008, why didn't it? The answer sits inside the financial trail. Because Epstein's wealth wasn't just stored. It was protected by structure.
Trusts.
Shell companies. Legal barriers. Each layer designed to separate him from direct ownership. On paper, assets belong to entities. Entities belong to trusts. Trusts belong to legal arrangements. And legal arrangements belong to paperwork, not people. That's how money survives its owner. Even after his death in August 2019, the money didn't vanish. It remained. Properties still existed. Accounts still existed. Trusts still existed. Because the system was built to outlive him. His estate was estimated at over $600 million. But even that number may not reflect the full picture. Because offshore structures don't always reveal themselves easily. And hidden money stays hidden until someone forces it into the light. Investigators followed the trail. Victims filed claims. Lawyers fought over assets. Banks faced scrutiny. But the money itself never speaks. It leaves clues, fragments, transactions,
Dates.
amounts, connections, but never intent. Intent lives in people. And Epstein took much of that intent with him. Still, the financial story reveals something deeper. Money didn't just enable his life. It extended his protection. For years. Longer than most people thought possible. Because wealth doesn't just buy comfort. It buys time. Time delays consequences. Time weakens outrage. Time allows systems to protect themselves. And Epstein's greatest asset wasn't cash. It was time. He built a financial structure that kept operating even when his reputation collapsed. Even when charges surfaced. Even when scrutiny increased. Because systems built slowly are harder to destroy quickly. And Epstein built his system over decades. One account at a time. One entity at a time. One transaction at a time. By the time the world fully looked, the machine was already massive,
Complex.
entangled, and resilient. Which leaves one final reality. Jeffrey Epstein is gone. But the pathways his money created
Still exist.
Now, let's pause for a moment. Think about Maya and Chloe, two ordinary girls, judged for the clothes they wore, the color of their skin, and the assumptions of someone who thought they held the power to decide their worth. Their story isn't just about privilege or billionaires. It's about dignity, fairness, and the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the odds. Ask yourself, how often do we stay silent when someone is being treated unfairly? How often do we assume appearances tell the full story? The next time you see someone judged, overlooked, or humiliated, remember Maya and Chloe. Speak up.
Support them.
Your actions, even small ones, have weight. They create ripples that reach farther than you know. So here's what you can do today. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with your experiences, when someone misjudged you, or when you stood up for another. Hit subscribe if you want more stories where courage wins and injustice is confronted. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a story that inspires action. Together, we can make kindness, fairness, and courage the rule, not the exception. When Jeffrey Epstein died on August 10, 2019, inside a federal detention center in New York, most people assumed the financial story was over. They were wrong. Because when a man like Epstein dies, his money doesn't die with him. It moves. Quietly. Legally. Systematically. Within days of his death, attention shifted to something called the estate of Jeffrey Epstein. And estate is not just a number. It is a legal entity. It becomes the temporary owner of everything a person controlled: cash, properties, investments, trusts, aircraft, art, and private financial interests. And Epstein's estate was massive. Estimates placed it at over $600 million. But the real story wasn't the number. It was the structure. Because Epstein had already prepared for this moment. 2 days before his death, he signed a will. Not years before. Not months before. 2 days. The timing raised immediate questions. Because timing matters in finance. His will moved the majority of his fortune into a trust called the 1953 Trust, named after his birth year. That trust became the new legal holder of his wealth, which meant something very important. The money no longer legally belonged to Jeffrey Epstein. It belonged to the trust. Trusts are powerful. They create distance. Distance between money and accountability. Distance between ownership and responsibility. Distance between past actions and present control. Because trusts don't die. People do. Inside that trust were his biggest assets. His Manhattan mansion. His Palm Beach estate. His private islands in the U.S. Virgin Islands. His investments. His cash accounts. His art. His aircraft interests. Everything consolidated. Everything protected. Everything frozen in legal structure. But money that large never stays still. Almost immediately, legal claims began. Victims filed lawsuits. They weren't suing Epstein anymore. They were suing his estate. Because legally, the estate inherited his financial obligations. This created a new financial flow. Money began moving out instead of in. Lawyers were hired. Settlement funds were created. Assets were evaluated for sale. Properties were prepared for liquidation. The machine reversed direction. Instead of collecting wealth, it began distributing it. But distribution is not simple. Every dollar had to be accounted for. Every payment had to be approved. Every claim had to be verified. And the estate fought to maintain control. Because protecting wealth doesn't end with death. It continues through process. One of the most important financial centers of Epstein's empire was the U.S. Virgin Islands. His island, Little St. James, wasn't just property. It was an asset worth tens of millions of dollars. Eventually, it was listed for sale. Not as a symbol, as a financial transaction. Because in the end, everything becomes a transaction. Even places tied to global headlines. The island eventually sold in 2023 for approximately $60 million. Money converted. Asset turned into liquidity. Liquidity absorbed into the estate. Then redirected. His Manhattan mansion followed. One of the largest private homes in New York City. It sold for over $50 million. Another conversion. Another movement. Palm Beach property.
Sold.
Art collections.
Sold.
Investments. Liquidated. Everything turned back into money. Because money is easier to divide than property. And division was coming. By 2021, Epstein's estate had agreed to create a victims' compensation program. Hundreds of millions of dollars were allocated. Victims filed claims. Each claim evaluated. Each settlement negotiated. Each payment approved. Money flowing out in controlled amounts. Not randomly. Strategically. Because estates don't release money emotionally. They release money legally. By 2022, reports indicated over $120 million had been paid to victims through the compensation program. And that number kept growing.
But not all money left.
Some remained inside trusts. Some remained protected. Some remained undisclosed. Because large financial systems always retain reserves, always maintain structure, always preserve what they can. At the same time, banks faced consequences. Institutions that handled Epstein's money faced lawsuits. Questions emerged. Why were accounts allowed to remain open? Why were transactions approved? Why were warnings not acted on faster? Financial institutions eventually agreed to settlements worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Again, money moved, not because money speaks, but because money resolves.
Quietly.
Without emotion, without apology. Just transfer. 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 Meanwhile, Epstein's former associates faced investigations. Not always criminal, often financial. Because financial trails reveal association. Association reveals proximity. Proximity creates risk. And risk affects money. Some distanced themselves immediately. Others remained silent. Because silence protects. Speaking creates exposure. Exposure creates consequence. And consequence threatens wealth. Today, years after his death, Epstein's financial network still hasn't fully disappeared. Some trusts remain active. Some financial records remain sealed. Some transactions remain unclear. Because financial systems built over decades don't disappear in years. They unwind slowly.
Piece by piece.
Claim by claim. Sale by sale. Transfer by transfer. What remains now isn't the man. It's the aftermath. A financial ghost. Properties turned into cash. Cash turned into settlements. Settlements turned into closure for some. But not all. Because money cannot erase history. It can only respond to it. And Epstein's money is still responding. Even now. Because in the end, his wealth did what wealth always does. It survived. It adapted. And it moved on. In the end, the story of Jeffrey Epstein was never just about one man.
It was about a system.
A financial system that measures value in numbers, not in questions. Because money, by design, is neutral. It doesn't care who holds it. It doesn't care how it was earned. It doesn't care where it goes next. It only moves. And the people inside that system are trained to help it move faster. Banks compete for wealthy clients. Private wealth managers promise discretion. Lawyers promise protection. Accountants promise efficiency. Each role has a function. Each function serves the same goal. Keep the money moving. Keep the client satisfied.
Keep the system alive.
Epstein understood this better than most. He understood that wealth changes how people see you. Not because wealth changes who you are, but because wealth changes what people are willing to ignore. When someone has millions, they are treated differently. When someone has hundreds of millions, they are treated carefully. When someone has influence, they are treated cautiously. And caution creates space. Space to operate. Space to continue. Space to avoid friction. Epstein didn't invent that system. He used it because the system was already there. Private banking exists to serve clients with large wealth. Offshore trusts exist to protect assets. Shell companies exist to separate ownership. Confidential settlements exist to resolve disputes quietly. Each tool has a legal purpose. Each tool has legitimate uses. But tools don't choose their users. People do. And once those tools were in Epstein's hands, they became part of his architecture. An architecture designed to survive scrutiny. An architecture designed to survive time. For years, the financial activity continued because no single transaction looked large enough to stop everything. Instead, it was a pattern. Small payments. Repeated payments. Structured payments. Patterns are harder to see when viewed up close. They only become clear with distance.
And distance takes time.
Time allowed the system to continue. Time allowed relationships to deepen. Time allowed money to spread. Because money rarely stays in one place. It touches people. It enters accounts. It becomes income. It becomes investment. It becomes lifestyle. And once money becomes part of someone's life, removing it becomes disruptive. Disruption creates resistance. Resistance creates silence. Silence protects the system. Even after Epstein's first conviction in 2008, the financial world did not fully reject him. Some institutions left. Others stayed. New ones entered. Because the system doesn't coordinate morality. It coordinates opportunity. If one door closes, another opens. If one bank refuses, another accepts. If one country enforces, another allows. Money adapts. It always adapts. This is not unique to Epstein. It is the nature of global finance. Wealth moves to where it is welcomed. It avoids where it is restricted. It finds paths of least resistance. And those paths are often invisible to the public. Because financial privacy is built into the system. Not as a flaw, as a feature. Privacy protects legitimate clients. But privacy also protects illegitimate activity. The system does not automatically distinguish between the two. It waits for someone to intervene. Someone to investigate. Someone to question. But questioning wealth is difficult. Because wealth carries influence. Influence creates hesitation. Hesitation creates delay. And delay allows continuation. For decades, Epstein's wealth created that delay. Even when concerns existed. Even when warnings appeared. Even when red flags were raised. Because red flags are signals, not actions. Action requires decision. Decision requires courage. And courage carries risk. Financial institutions face a constant calculation. Protect reputation. Or protect revenue. Sometimes they choose reputation. Sometimes they choose revenue. Sometimes they delay choosing. Delay keeps the system stable. But stability for the system does not always mean justice outside it. After Epstein's death, investigations exposed parts of the system. Not all of it. Parts of it. Enough to see the structure. Enough to see the pathways. Enough to see how money created insulation. Not immunity. Insulation. Insulation slows consequences. It does not eliminate them. It stretches them, extends them, delays them. For Epstein, delay lasted decades. But delay has limits. Eventually, scrutiny arrived. Eventually, pressure increased. Eventually, the system began to respond. Banks paid settlements. Estates paid victims. Assets were liquidated. Money flowed outward. The same system that protected wealth began redistributing it. Not because the system changed. Because pressure forced it to act. Pressure is the only force that redirects money against its original path. Without pressure, money continues where it was already going. Toward growth. Toward protection.
Toward preservation.
Even now, the full financial map may never be known. Some accounts were closed. Some records were sealed. Some transactions remain private. Because financial secrecy does not disappear automatically. It must be dismantled deliberately. And dismantling takes time. Years. Sometimes generations. Because financial systems are designed to outlive individuals. They are designed to continue. That is their purpose. Epstein built his financial structure with that same principle. Continuation. Even after his death, his estate functioned. His trusts functioned. His assets functioned. Because systems do not feel shock. They follow rules. Rules determine movement. Not emotion. Not outrage. Not headlines. Rules. And rules are slow to change. But this story leaves behind more than financial lessons. It leaves behind a question. Not how Epstein made his money. Not how he spent it. But how the system responded to it. Because the system saw the money long before the public saw the man. It processed the transactions. It approved the transfers. It maintained the accounts. It enabled the continuity. Not because it supported him personally, but because it served wealth impersonally. That is the difference. The system does not choose sides. It chooses function. And its function is movement. This is why the story matters beyond one individual. Because the same system still exists. The same structures still exist. The same tools still exist. Wealth still moves through private channels. Trust still separate ownership. Shell companies still create distance. Private banking still protects confidentiality. None of that ended. Only one participant did. Which means the real ending is not clean. It is incomplete. Because systems do not end. They evolve. They adjust. They continue. And the money continues with them. What Epstein built was not infinite. But it was durable. Durable enough to last decades. Durable enough to protect him for years. Durable enough to survive him. In the end, money did what it always does. It moved. It protected. It delayed. It responded. And then it moved again. Leaving behind questions. Leaving behind consequences. Leaving behind a financial trail that showed one simple truth. Money does not create the system. The system creates what money can become. The plane shuddered violently as it descended, a harsh reminder that no amount of money could make the sky bend to one man's will. Marcus Thorne, seated in 1E, watched the digital map blink erratically. Heathrow's sprawling terminals should have been laid out beneath them, gates glowing like a constellation, but instead the path was shifting. Something was wrong. "Dad," Maya whispered, her voice trembling, eyes wide behind the noise-canceling headphones. "Why are we flying so low?" "The map shows us heading toward the cargo area." Marcus' jaw tightened. He leaned back in the leather cocoon of his suite, the vibration of the engines a dull, omnipresent threat. "Because," he said quietly, "Captain Reynolds is trying to play God." Chloe looked up from her tablet, sensing the tension radiating off her father. "Play God? What does that mean?" Marcus' gaze fell on the small bruise forming on Maya's wrist from where Officer Miller had twisted it hours ago. That bruise was a reminder that money, power, or influence didn't protect you from the arbitrary cruelty of those convinced they were untouchable. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the responsibility. "It means we're about to be tested." The Boeing 777 slammed down onto the tarmac with unnecessary force, the landing reverberating through the cabin like a gunshot. Passengers, well, his daughters, seated like royalty amid a sea of empty first-class pods, clutched the armrests as the reverse thrusters roared, forcing the plane into a sudden deceleration. Instead of taxiing toward Terminal 5, the plane veered sharply, gliding onto a remote taxiway, isolated, stark, surrounded by high fences topped with barbed wire. "Remain seated," Captain Reynolds' voice boomed over the intercom, harsh and inflexible. "Do not unbuckle your seatbelts. Authorities are boarding the aircraft." Through the reinforced cabin windows, Maya's eyes went wide. Black vans, armored vehicles, men in tactical gear swarmed the tarmac with terrifying precision. They were not airport security. This was something else entirely. SCO-19, the Specialist Firearms Command of the London Metropolitan Police, one of the most elite counterterrorism units in the world. "Oh my God," Maya gasped, hyperventilating. "Dad, they have guns. They have machine guns." "Stay calm," Marcus ordered, his voice cutting through the panic like steel. He rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm, projecting a presence that seemed impossible inside a pressurized cabin. "Do not move. Do not speak unless I tell you to." The front left door of the plane burst open. The cold London morning air swept through the cabin, carrying the faint smell of fuel and concrete. Tactical officers stepped inside, weapons raised, boots heavy on the floor. Behind them, moving with purposeful calm, was a man in a trench coat, Detective Chief Inspector Graves. The air seemed to shift, the sound of disciplined boots echoing like thunder inside the hollow metal fuselage. Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit, chest puffed in defiance. He pointed a shaking finger at Marcus. "That's him. That's the man he claimed to hijack the airline. Arrest him under the Aviation Security Act." The words hung like a guillotine suspended over Marcus. The penalty for hijacking? Life in prison. One false move, one misunderstanding, and the daughters he'd just rescued could be left fatherless. Marcus raised his palms slowly, deliberately, keeping his body language non-threatening but resolute. "Inspector," he said, voice calm, projecting authority equal to the armed men before him. Before you make a mistake that could cost the British taxpayer millions in wrongful arrest settlements, check this. Reynolds' face contorted with disbelief. He's manipulating you. He's a billionaire. He thinks he's above the law. Graves' eyes narrowed. Explain yourself, sir. Marcus held up his phone. You are looking at the proof, live from headquarters in New York and London. Interphone recordings, encrypted real-time communication from my legal team, verification from Sir Arthur Pendergast, the chairman of Global Transport Holdings, the parent company. I legally acquired a controlling interest in Royal Horizon Airlines mid-flight. The tactical officers froze, exchanging quick, confused glances. Graves reached for his own phone, scanning emails and encrypted messages Marcus had sent moments earlier. Captain Reynolds, we received your distress call regarding a hostile takeover and threat to flight safety. Graves' voice hardened, dry and unyielding. The recording tells a different story. Mr. Thorne did not threaten the flight. He was asserting corporate ownership over assets he legally acquired. Reynolds' face paled, his certainty cracking. That can't be. He's a passenger. He threatened my crew. Graves interrupted, sharp and absolute. You diverted a commercial airliner, mobilized counterterrorism forces, and filed a false distress report because your ego was bruised. You endangered your passengers. That makes you the real threat, Captain. The cabin was silent. Marcus remained standing, composed, his daughter's eyes wide but trusting. Every tactical officer in the plane had recalibrated their target, from the supposed hijacker to the real source of danger, the captain who had weaponized the law for his own pride. Two officers lowered their MP5s, stepping toward Reynolds. Graves' voice cut through the tension. Captain Bill Reynolds, you are under arrest for perverting the course of justice, reckless endangerment, and filing a false police report. You do not have authority over the airline's ownership. You do not get to weaponize the police. Reynolds' protests dissolved into screams and frantic gesturing. I'm the captain. I have a union contract. You are the danger, Graves repeated, voice lethal in its calmness. Handcuffs clicked over the polished gold of Reynolds' uniform stripes, the sound of hubris being dismantled. Marcus walked to Maya and Chloe, placing a firm, protective hand on each of their shoulders. It's over, he said softly. You're safe. Nobody gets to humiliate you again. Chloe's lips trembled. Dad, really? Really, he said. Justice doesn't always happen fast, but today it did. The walk down the air stair to the waiting vehicles was surreal. Marcus expected the applause, the recognition, but none of that mattered now. It was the daughter's dignity restored that counted. Reynolds, who had imagined himself the hero of the story, stumbled into the waiting police van, his uniform rumpled, career evaporated in a single, merciless shift. The wind whipped around Marcus and his daughters, pulling at their hoodies and jackets. He looked down at Reynolds, eyes cold. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply observed the consequences of arrogance. Maya, still rubbing the bruise on her arm, looked up at her father, her eyes reflecting a mix of awe and relief. Dad, is it over? She whispered. Marcus took a deep breath, exhaling against the sharp London morning. The bad part is over. But now comes the work. A black Range Rover, sleek and bulletproof, slid to a stop beside the tarmac, bypassing the police vehicles entirely. A chauffeur opened the door, and Marcus gestured to his daughters. Let's go. The three of them climbed in, the roar of the jet engines fading behind them. The city of London, gray and misty, sprawled beneath them, a reminder that even the streets of London were damp, mist curling around the edges of the buildings like ghosts of the past. Marcus Thorne walked briskly along the polished cobblestones, his daughters following closely behind. The events at Heathrow still lingered in his mind. The roar of engines, the gleam of tactical weapons, the crushing sense of helplessness turned to vindication. But he knew the real work had just begun. He had won the immediate battle, exposing Captain Reynolds' hubris and the corruption hiding in plain sight within Royal Horizon Airlines, but victory was fragile. He glanced at Maya, who clutched her notebook tightly, as if writing down each moment would make the chaos feel real. Chloe's eyes darted everywhere, alert, still attuned to the slightest hint of danger. The weight of trauma was present, even after safety had been restored. "Dad," Maya whispered, hesitant. "Are we really done with this?" Marcus stopped and crouched, placing both hands on her shoulders. His eyes met hers with the intensity of a man who had faced down both law and power and emerged intact. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "We're done with the fear. The work, making sure nobody else suffers like this, we're just beginning." The Black Range Rover had already begun moving, gliding silently through the early morning London traffic. Marcus and his daughters were headed for the Royal Horizon London headquarters, a glass and steel monument to both ambition and arrogance. Inside, the boardroom would soon host 30 executives, some loyal, some complicit, all about to confront a reality they had never imagined: accountability. As they entered the lobby, the receptionist froze, recognizing Marcus from the viral footage that had already dominated headlines across the Atlantic. Cameras, social media posts, and news networks had immortalized the confrontation at Heathrow. He didn't pause for pleasantries. Pleasantries were wasted here. Justice had a momentum of its own, and it waited for no one. The boardroom doors opened, and 30 pairs of eyes turned toward Marcus. Their expressions ranged from polite curiosity to thinly veiled panic. Among them, Patricia Vance sat stiffly, her posture rigid, trying to conceal the flicker of fear in her eyes. Greg Sterling's hands drummed nervously on the table. And there, in the corner, Reynolds' absence, replaced by a man in his uniform, quietly collecting belongings, was a reminder that hubris had consequences. Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding yet calm, like a storm held just before the lightning strikes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady, resonant with authority, "you witnessed what happened at Heathrow. You saw what happens when individuals act above the law, when arrogance eclipses responsibility, when personal pride endangers human lives." A murmur ran through the room, whispers like ripples across water, but Marcus ignored them. His eyes swept across each executive in turn, and the air tightened. "That ends today. Royal Horizon Airlines will no longer be a haven for unchecked privilege. No one will be treated as untouchable. No passenger, no employee, no child will suffer due to bias or abuse of power." He clicked the remote, and the large screen at the end of the boardroom flickered to life. Video footage, emails, intercom recordings, proof of misconduct, harassment, and violations of internal protocol played in crisp, undeniable clarity. The executives leaned forward, faces pale. The evidence was inescapable. "This," Marcus continued, voice low and deliberate, "is not about punishment alone. It's about rebuilding trust. Starting today, Royal Horizon Airlines implements blind hiring practices, mandatory bias training for every employee, and a $50 million fund dedicated to compensating passengers wronged by the system over the last decade." Patricia Vance shifted uneasily, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Thorne, are you aware of the financial implications of—" "Patricia," Marcus interrupted, cutting through her protests like a blade, "profit is secondary. Legacy is everything. Those unwilling to adapt to a new culture, one of accountability, dignity, and integrity, may step aside. The door is open." The silence in the room was deafening. Executives who once wielded authority like a shield now found themselves exposed, their careers balanced on a knife's edge. Some would leave voluntarily, others forced out. The boardroom had transformed into an arena of reckoning. Marcus leaned back, letting the gravity of the moment settle. "This is not personal," he said. "This is justice. For Maya. For Chloe. For every passenger who trusted Royal Horizon to get them safely to their destination, without fear, humiliation, or prejudice." Chloe shifted slightly, her fingers brushing Marcus' sleeve. The subtle reassurance was a quiet testament. They were in this together. The children had borne witness to courage, to decisiveness, and now, They were watching morality triumph over hubris. Over the following weeks, Marcus oversaw the implementation of sweeping reforms. HR protocols were rewritten, employees underwent rigorous sensitivity training, and audits of every flight, crew, and officer involved in passenger relations were conducted. The company's social media pages became a channel for transparency, public apologies, updates on corrective measures, and even direct responses to complaints. Maya and Chloe returned to school in New York, but their father's mission never left them. They had witnessed the consequences of unchecked power, and they knew, deeply, that change required both courage and persistence. News coverage painted Marcus as a modern-day crusader, but he remained modest, refusing interviews that would sensationalize his actions. His goal was not fame, it was justice, accountability, and protection for the innocent. Yet, Marcus understood the delicate balance of legacy. It was not enough to punish the guilty. He had to ensure that the culture itself shifted. Board meetings, employee workshops, and corporate retreats now included exercises that focused on empathy, perspective-taking, and ethical decision-making. Decisions were no longer dictated solely by bottom lines. They were influenced by human dignity, transparency, and fairness. Months later, the story reached the broader public in a viral documentary-style feature. Maya watched the footage of the Heathrow confrontation, her heart pounding as she relived the fear, the courage, and finally, the triumph. The video comments flooded with messages from passengers who had experienced similar injustices. "Thank you for standing up. My child was treated unfairly too. Finally, someone is holding them accountable." The impact rippled beyond Royal Horizon Airlines. Other airlines, inspired by the Thorne intervention, began auditing internal practices, retraining staff, and establishing passenger advocacy boards. Regulators in London, New York, and Washington praised the reforms, citing them as a blueprint for ethical accountability in corporate structures that had long operated in shadows. One crisp morning, Marcus sat at his home in Manhattan, overlooking the skyline. Maya entered, notebook in hand, pages filled with reflections, observations, and months had passed since Marcus Thorne's decisive confrontation with Royal Horizon Airlines. London's skies no longer carried the tension of that fateful morning at Heathrow. The city moved forward, seemingly oblivious to the storm that had once raged across polished runways and boardroom tables. But the reverberations of those events were far from over. Marcus walked along the banks of the Thames, the winter sun low, casting long shadows on the rippling water. Each step was deliberate, reflective, almost ritualistic. He carried with him not just the weight of his actions but the knowledge that justice, real, enduring justice, was never a single act. It was a series of choices, some public, some private, all demanding courage. Maya trailed behind him, her notebook in hand. She had begun documenting the entire ordeal, her observations a careful blend of emotion and analysis. Her writing, she hoped, could inspire others to confront injustice in their own lives, to act when fear or convenience tempted them to remain silent. "Dad," she said softly, "do you think people really change? I mean, beyond Royal Horizon?" Marcus stopped, gazing at the river as if it held the answer. "Some will," he said slowly. "Some won't. But even the ones who resist, those who cling to old habits, will feel the ripple. Every time someone sees courage stand against wrongdoing, it shifts the world a little. And that's enough to start." Chloe joined them, bundled in a thick scarf, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "Do you ever think about Captain Reynolds?" she asked, her tone cautious, almost wary. "I mean, does he understand what he lost?" Marcus shook his head. "Some lessons aren't learned until you hit rock bottom. And even then, some people never learn. What matters is what we do with the power we have, with the time we're given. That's the difference between someone who endures and someone who leaves a mark." The ripple effect wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Across Europe and the United States, airlines began revising policies, auditing protocols, and instituting passenger advocacy boards. Regulators praised Marcus' approach, holding Royal Horizon up as a model of accountability. News outlets ran human interest features highlighting passengers whose experiences had once been dismissed. For the first time, stories of injustice within corporate systems were treated not as isolated incidents, but as systemic failures requiring action. Marcus was invited to speak at corporate ethics conferences, universities, and advocacy forums. Each time, he was careful to emphasize one principle: change is possible, but it begins with courage, with integrity, with refusal to remain silent when the stakes are high. Yet the personal cost had been immense. Marcus had lost hours of sleep, strained his health, and endured the scrutiny of the public eye. Maya and Chloe, too, had been drawn into a whirlwind of fear, responsibility, and early exposure to the realities of human cruelty. Their childhood innocence had been fractured, but in its place, resilience and awareness had blossomed. One evening, in the quiet of their Manhattan apartment, Marcus found himself alone with Maya. Chloe was at a sleepover with friends, a small luxury that symbolized a return to normalcy. The city hummed softly outside the window, but inside, Marcus felt the weight of reflection pressing down. "Dad," Maya said, hesitant, "do you ever regret it? Getting involved, exposing Reynolds, confronting the board?" Marcus met her gaze, the lines of his face softening. "No," he said quietly. "Regret is for those who remain passive, who ignore injustice. Action, no matter how difficult, is what shapes the world." Maya nodded slowly, absorbing his words. I worry about you, about us." "That's natural," Marcus replied. "Fear is a constant companion when you choose to act. But courage doesn't mean absence of fear. Courage is acting despite it." Over the following weeks, Marcus worked tirelessly to institutionalize the reforms he had championed. He collaborated with HR experts, psychologists, and legal consultants to create programs that would prevent future abuses. Every employee underwent sensitivity and ethics training, with some sessions broadcast company-wide to ensure transparency. The changes began to show results. Complaints of mistreatment dropped significantly. Passengers reported feeling respected and safe. Even Reynolds' former colleagues acknowledged that the culture was shifting, though not all were comfortable with it. Some resisted, clinging to old hierarchies and practices, but Marcus' insistence on accountability left no room for compromise. Meanwhile, Marcus' family life stabilized in ways that were almost miraculous. Maya and Chloe thrived academically and socially, enriched by the lessons of resilience they had absorbed. They spoke openly about courage, fairness, and ethical responsibility, their conversations now informed by lived experience rather than theory. Marcus often found himself marveling at how his daughters had grown, not merely surviving, but flourishing. But Marcus knew that personal growth could not substitute for societal vigilance. He began reaching out to other corporate whistleblowers and advocates, mentoring them on navigating complex systems without losing moral grounding. His network expanded to include journalists, lawyers, and community leaders who shared his commitment to accountability. A year after the Heathrow incident, a new report on corporate ethics was released. Royal Horizon Airlines was featured prominently as a case study, detailing the reforms Marcus had implemented. The media coverage highlighted the company's transparency, employee engagement programs, and the establishment of a dedicated fund for passenger restitution. Marcus received numerous messages from people who had been inspired to act in their own spheres. A flight attendant from Chicago wrote about confronting management over unfair treatment of passengers. A university student detailed organizing a campaign to address bias in student services. Marcus read each message carefully, understanding that these small acts were the seeds of a larger movement. Amidst this external success, Marcus faced his own personal reckoning. The trauma of the Heathrow incident, coupled with the stress of implementing corporate reforms, had taken a toll on him physically and mentally. He sought therapy, finding solace in structured reflection and professional guidance. Over time, he realized that healing was not a linear process. It was a series of small victories, moments of acceptance, and acts of self-care. On a chilly spring morning, Marcus visited Heathrow, not as a hero confronting injustice, but as a father and citizen reflecting on the journey. The terminal was bustling with passengers, luggage rolling across polished floors, announcements echoing in a familiar cadence. He observed families, business travelers, and tourists, each unaware of the turbulence that had once threatened their safety. He spotted an elderly couple struggling with their bags. Marcus stepped forward instinctively, helping them navigate to a waiting cart. The simple act of kindness reminded him that justice was not only a corporate responsibility, it was also personal. Every small action, every moment of empathy, contributed to the culture he had fought to create. Later that day, he returned home, greeted by Maya and Chloe, who had been working on a community project related to ethics education in schools. They shared stories of children learning to stand up for one another. The first light of dawn crept over Manhattan, casting a gentle glow across the skyline. Marcus Thorne stood on his apartment balcony, coffee in hand, watching the city awaken. It had been nearly 2 years since the Heathrow incident, and yet, every morning felt like a quiet triumph. The battle he had fought had changed more than just a corporate system. It had reshaped lives, perspectives, and most importantly, the way he saw himself. The city below moved with an energy that was both relentless and inspiring. Marcus knew that the world didn't pause to acknowledge victories. Life went on, challenges emerged, and the smallest acts of courage often went unnoticed. But he had learned to find meaning not in recognition but in impact. Maya bounded onto the balcony, her backpack slung over one shoulder.
Dad.
"Guess what?" she exclaimed, her excitement contagious. "Our school board approved the new ethics curriculum. They're starting it next semester." Marcus smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "That's amazing, Maya. You've worked hard for this." Maya grinned. "We all did. But yeah, your speeches, your stories, they helped convince them. People actually listened." Chloe joined them, holding a tablet that displayed messages from their community project. "And look at this," she said, scrolling through a series of emails. "Kids from other districts are writing in, asking for guides on starting their own ethics initiatives. Your ripple effect isn't just local anymore." Marcus leaned back, absorbing the moment. The thought that actions taken in a single confrontation could inspire youth across the country felt surreal. Yet, it was also a testament to what he had always believed. Change begins with courage, integrity, and persistence. The ripple effect extended far beyond schools. Royal Horizon Airlines had become a case study in corporate accountability. Other airlines, and even companies in unrelated industries, referenced their reforms in annual reports, presentations, and ethics seminars. Employees felt empowered, passengers respected, and regulators satisfied that systemic change was underway. Marcus reflected on Captain Reynolds, the man whose arrogance had once threatened safety and fairness. Reynolds had resigned quietly, retreating into obscurity. While some might consider that justice served, Marcus knew the real victory was cultural. The environment Reynolds had once dominated was now governed by principles of accountability and transparency. At home, life had found a rhythm. Maya and Chloe thrived academically and socially. Evenings were filled with laughter, conversation, and occasional debates about justice, fairness, and personal responsibility. Marcus found solace in their curiosity, their compassion, and the confidence that had grown from witnessing their father's choices. One evening, Marcus attended a gala for corporate ethics. The room buzzed with conversation, a mix of executives, journalists, and activists. Marcus had long ago abandoned any desire for accolades, yet the organizers insisted he be honored for his exceptional commitment to systemic change and public advocacy. As he accepted the award, Marcus glanced over the audience. He saw faces of those who had fought alongside him, those who had been inspired, and those who had learned the hard way that integrity could not be compromised. He spoke with measured emotion. Change is rarely comfortable. It demands courage, vigilance, and sometimes personal sacrifice. But the rewards, the real rewards, are not found in recognition, but in the lives touched, the injustices corrected, and the legacy left behind. The applause was warm, genuine. Marcus returned to his seat, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. Yet, he knew that the work never truly ended. Each act of courage planted seeds, and each seed required nurturing. Legacy was not a monument, but a living, evolving force. Back home, the Thorne family gathered for dinner. Maya had prepared a small presentation on her ethics curriculum, complete with slides and anecdotes from her classmates. Chloe shared a report from their community initiative, highlighting children who had stood up to bullying, advocated for fairness, and inspired others to do the same. Marcus listened, heart full, realizing that the greatest impact of his journey wasn't in the headlines, the awards, or even the corporate reforms. It was in these moments, in witnessing the next generation internalize the principles he had fought for. Later that night, Marcus found a quiet moment alone in his study. He opened a journal, a habit he had picked up to process the complexities of the past 2 years. He wrote about fear, courage, setbacks, victories, and the intricate web of human connection that had sustained him. Each word felt like a bridge between past and future, a personal testament to resilience. As the city slept, Marcus reflected on the lessons that had emerged from his ordeal. Courage transcends fear. True bravery is acting in the face of uncertainty, choosing integrity over convenience. Accountability is contagious. One act of principled action can inspire countless others. Legacy is relational. It is measured not by accolades, but by lives touched, values instilled, and culture transformed. Healing is ongoing. Trauma may leave scars, but reflection, connection, and purpose cultivate resilience. Change is iterative. Lasting reform arises from persistence, vigilance, and collective action. The next morning, Marcus walked along the Hudson River, a ritual that had become a space for contemplation and renewal. The river, ever flowing, symbolized continuity and the passage of time. Marcus realized that just as water shapes the land gradually, so too does consistent ethical action shape society. He paused near a small bench, noticing an elderly man struggling to read a map. Marcus offered assistance, guiding the man with patience and kindness. The simplicity of the interaction reinforced a truth he had come to cherish. Small acts, repeated with integrity, ripple far beyond what can be measured. As spring turned to summer, Marcus continued advocating for systemic change, mentoring emerging leaders, and fostering ethical education. His daughters remained at his side, their insights sharp, their empathy unwavering. Together, they formed a living embodiment of the principles Marcus had championed. News outlets occasionally revisited the Heathrow incident, not as sensational headlines, but as a testament to the possibility of meaningful reform. Scholars analyzed the systemic changes in corporate culture, citing Marcus' efforts as a pivotal moment. Activists referenced his journey as inspiration for campaigns that bridged corporate and community ethics. And yet, Marcus remained grounded. Recognition, while appreciated, was secondary. His true measure of success lay in observing children stand up against injustice, in witnessing employees treat one another with respect, and in seeing families, like his own, thrive in an environment of compassion and accountability. On a quiet evening, the Thorne family gathered on the balcony. The skyline glimmered, a constellation of human endeavor. Maya and Chloe leaned against Marcus, sharing stories from their day. He listened, absorbing the beauty of continuity, the quiet victories, and the promise of the future. "This," Marcus said softly, "is what matters. The world may not always notice, but the ripples endure. They shape culture, inspire action, and cultivate integrity." Maya smiled, her voice full of certainty. "And we'll keep it going, right? Even when we're grown." Marcus stood on the balcony, the city lights reflecting in the river below. The world hadn't paused for him, it never would, but he had learned that true change didn't need an audience. It lived in quiet moments, the courage to speak up, the wisdom to guide the next generation, and the integrity to act even when no one was watching. Maya and Chloe leaned against him, their laughter filling the evening air. Marcus realized that legacy wasn't about awards, headlines, or recognition. It was in the lives touched, the ripples created, and the values carried forward. Every act of courage, no matter how small, had the power to reshape the world. And that ripple, it didn't stop here. It was alive in schools, homes, workplaces, and hearts across the nation. It was unstoppable, enduring, eternal. Now it's your turn. What ripple will you create? Will you stand for integrity, speak up for justice, or guide someone with kindness today? The smallest action can spark the biggest change. Glowing Star, join the movement. Share this story, comment your thoughts, and inspire someone today. Because real legacy isn't just read, it's lived.